Sarah Mishkelly, how are you? Joining us from Costa Rica, originally from Toronto, and you are someone many real estate investors want to get to know and presumably also live a similar lifestyle to. Welcome to our short interview. How's it going?
It is amazing. That was a really great way to put it because I was once one of those people wanting to move to Costa Rica, and here I am.
We're recording winter time, end of 2023, and I think especially whether it's a realtor or anyone who's an investor, a lot of people are stuck in the cold. It's been a really not a great year at all in the markets, and I think people are getting more optimistic going to 2024. And naturally, everyone to some degree has heard of a multifamily investment or a syndicate, and there's different ways to do this, whether it's on the commercial side through us, applying for loan yourself with CMHC, it's local to Canada, lots of great incentives around that asset class, of course. Of course, way more work, harder to qualify, you need a bigger down payment. On your end, on the syndicate side, and actually not in Canada, in the USA, a bit of a different approach. So how do people get started with investing in syndications? And talk about a bit of your story on how you went from stuck in Toronto to living in Costa Rica with what looks like an actual real background. That's not that's a
Real.
real background. Amazing.
Yeah, so I'll touch on that. And really, I was one of those people. I was a realtor for years in Toronto, aggressively scaling up a business. I wanted to get to 1 mil. That was my goal, 1 million a year. I got to about 400K and I was exhausted. And I got to a point where, my income from my assets, I had, properties in Toronto, a couple of small multifamily that I was managing. I'm second generation real estate. So I was really blessed to kind of grow up in this world. The cash flow from that was really sufficient at some level to live a good life. And I was like, why am I chasing this money as a realtor and kind of spinning my wheels? And that's when I was like, look, I'm going to really reflect on my portfolio and what I'm creating here and try to find a way to use real estate, the thing that I love, to build more balance into my life. And my husband and I are both real estate investors. I took a lot of the money I was making as a realtor, invested a part of every commission, and put it into passive deals like private lending and syndications. And that also helped me generate cash flow to now, finance our lifestyle in Costa Rica. So paying for rent, nannies, all that type of stuff. I have two small children now. So it is possible. And there's a lot of people in the town that I'm living in Costa Rica who are doing something similar.
Love that. Tell us about the process of your first syndication, and of course, you can now lead into how you're leading some of these as well.
Yeah, for sure. So I did start in Toronto, but as you know, the Canadian market, you're in Vancouver, I'm in Toronto, there's not a lot of opportunity. There's a very high price points and the cash flow is not really there. So I took the initiative to go into the US and start to find great sponsorship teams that are doing this on a big scale in the US. And since I've been investing since I was about like 20, I'm 34 now, I knew what to look for. I knew what kind of people are good people to work with, what are people that aren't good to work with. And when you get into this space as a passive investor, an LP, that's a limited partner, it's very simple. Like, I know it kind of sounds overly simplistic, and I get comments on LinkedIn because I'm very active on LinkedIn being like, is this a scam? Is this a Ponzi scheme? But the reality is, when you find a good team to work with, you are just vetoing them, getting some paperwork signed by lawyers, reviewing the deal deck, and from there, you're essentially wiring over the funds and receiving cash flow quarterly and a share of the profits when an asset sells between 3 to 7 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and tell us like let's storify this. So I'm an investor. I have X amount of money that I want to put to work. The alternatives in Canada, as you said, are pretty small, but there are lots of like mix. Some mortgage investment corporations. There's REITs. There's different funds that generally between 8 to 10% return is fair, not guaranteed, but quite certain, right? These are conservative private loans you invest into. That's my benchmark. We won't talk about equities, but that's kind of like my frame. So here's a potential syndicate. I guess I'm curious on minimum investment, typically, risk profile, and also just like effort. Because if something takes a lot of work and effort, why not just throw it into like, I mean, at this point we got 5% GICs, right? So how does it stack up to other investments, and how do I get started in terms of like a minimum spend, time horizon, etc.? Maybe dig more into that, and I think we can kind of we can riff on it for a little bit.
Definitely. Now, as a Canadian, I would definitely say that you don't have to go to the States. Like, I'm not sitting here being like the States is the only option. If you can
Mhm.
find opportunities in Canada that you are happy with the returns, and I think a component of this is gratitude versus greed. If you are happy with 8 to 10% cash flow and you feel really secure in that investment and you like to stay local, then go for it. I don't think that the grass is always greener, although I will share the
Mhm.
structure that is in the
Mhm.
States. When you're investing in a syndication in the US, there is one, a tax treaty between Canada and the US. So you're not going to be double taxed. And that's one of the biggest questions that we do get. The way it looks like as a minimum is a lot of these deals are a higher entry. So we're looking at like 50K, 75K, sometimes 100K. I recently had a deal in Dallas that was 25K minimum, but we're talking USD. Keep
Mhm.
that in mind because we all
Mhm.
know how much that conversion hurts. So the minimums are high. What I also like to tell people though is, somebody in Canada in a major city like Vancouver or Toronto, if you're trying to buy your own property, your down payment's going to be what, 20% of a million. So you want to kind of, weigh that out. Now, when you're getting into these deals, once you put in that minimum, you're usually going to be getting about, a 6 to 8% cash flow each year. So it's not crazy. The big benefit is the pop you're going to get when that asset sells. So we're talking about apartment buildings, like 100+ unit apartment buildings. And because they're so large, we have to bring on equity partners. So when you're involved in this, there's a business plan. We call it apartment flipping. Essentially, there's a business plan in place for like five years. If we can finish that business plan sooner, like in 3 years, then obviously you'd be making more because we'd fulfill on that faster and it would increase your returns. But from there, you're making what's called a 1.9x equity multiple, for example. So let's just say you put in 100,000, like let's keep it super simple. You invest 100,000 into this deal. Quarterly, you're going to get 6.7% cash flow. You can use it or you can leave it in your bank account, let it, ride out. And then after, let's say 5 years, you're going to get a share of the profits. So a 1.9x equity multiple means that the cash flow you've gotten over the length of that deal plus the share of the profits would equal about $90,000 because you'd put in 100,000. So at the end of, let's say 5 years, you'd get back $190,000. And that is the way that these deals are structured. And what's great about them is I've done private lending where I'm just getting, my cash flow yearly, let's see, like 8%, like you mentioned. With this, it's almost like you purchased a property, you got cash flow from tenants, and you sold that property and then got a share of the profit. So the model is a little bit different.
Mhm. Super clear. I appreciate that. So in this case, net, I'm making $90,000 in those 5 years, right? So,
Yes.
divide that per year, it's about whatever, 18K or something. And you're saying that includes the initial 6% a year. So we're talking 6 grand. And then the payout at year 5, so it's 6 grand times 5 years. Okay, 30,000 pretty much is in cash, and the other 60,000 would be from like a one-time liquidity event at the end of the 5 years. Is that kind of how the cash flow can be
Yes.
thought about? Okay, okay, got it. Okay, super clear. Yeah, that's and I guess the argument would be that, well, if I compound interest with something that's making 8% or 10% from year 1 to year 5, I still think probably that's going to be less than the 1.9x. I'm just going to make that assertion, obviously. So I guess the downside is your money is locked in, of course. So if something else comes up, it's, I'm guessing there's no real flexibility in liquidating before. And there's also, I guess, potentially risk that if it's a bad project, a bad sponsor, which is a key word for the lead of the project. I talk about what a sponsor is really quickly because that's very important. And then, yeah, as far as what I'm talking about with the flow of of money there. Any comments you want to add there would be great. But yeah, who are the sponsors, and again, why is this really better than a compound interest situation with something in Canada or anywhere else for that matter?
Yeah, so sponsorship team is critical. And what that means is these are the people who are doing the work for you. So the whole point of this and why people love it is it's passive. So you get to own a part of an actual apartment building versus if you're investing in something like a REIT or, the stock market, your money is going somewhere that at some level you don't really know where it's going. When you're investing in a multifamily asset, you actually know, okay, I'm putting money towards something that is fixing the landscaping, is, putting in a new kitchen. So there's this hard asset component of it that people really love. Now, in terms of the sponsorship team and why they're so critical, is the most work you're going to do as a passive investor is your due diligence at the beginning to make sure that the people that you are giving your money to know what they're doing. And I'll give kind of a little bit of an example of what's been happening the last few years. So the multifamily sector and syndications have been around for like 50 plus years. Like it's a really old business model. You know this because it's the same thing in Canada. Syndications is a term that people insiders in the industry understand, but not people don't always know it when they're outside of the industry. But it's kind of being democratized a little bit and become more popular, through social media, and just information is shared at a higher level now. And a lot of players came into the game the last few years because of the popularity, and they didn't really know what they were doing. And unfortunately, a lot of deals have, become more risky because the Fed's increased interest rates so fast and the margins got so tight with the returns to investors, because obviously if interest rates go up, there's less to be given out, right? So I think that the people that really survived through the storm of the last few years were sponsorship teams that have been in this business for like 20 years, 10 years, not ones that started in what I would call a unicorn market where everybody was making money and everything was just, people were also throwing a lot of money around. When you're trying to invest with other people, you need to do a lot of work to make sure that they know what they're doing. And that is asking about their track record. How many deals have they gone what's called full cycle on? That means has an investor put their money in, gotten their money back and their returns on one occasion, two occasions, three occasions?
How many should they have minimum? What's the minimum number if there's a rule of thumb?
You know what? I would personally have more confidence if they'd done three, but I don't want to say there's like a hard and fast rule of thumb. You just want to know what they're doing, right? That they've weathered some storms in a sense. And then additionally, you want to just find out more about, who their investor base is, find out more about their on the ground people, their property management team, because property management is so important because that's how you're boosting the net operating income, the NOI, which because it's commercial, that's what actually reflects to the value of the asset is based on the net operating income. And that's why it's different from residential, which is more like comps and stuff. So there's a lot of that hard questions that need to get asked and like your proof in a sense. You can ask for the underwriting. Any good deal team is going to give you the underwriting. So things like of that nature. What's happened in their past years, if they projected a 1.9x equity multiple in their last deal, what actually happened? Like, can you see some proof that they've actually fulfilled on their business plan? And so I know this is a lot and I'm happy to further conversations with people, but this is so important. Yeah, because and I emphasize it so much because if you're going to go into this deal, you're working with these people for 5 years, maybe 10 years, 15 years. If you actually like the deal team, most of my investors cycle through, they're going to go on one deal, they like it, they go into the next deal, they go into the next deal. So you want to make sure you're getting into bed. I know it's not the most appropriate term, but you get my point, with people that you trust, essentially.
Definitely. And so just visualizing this, give us maybe a case study or a deal that you have on the go that just happened and let us just visualize what that looks like. So you are generally capitalizing on an area in the US, maybe, Dallas, could be Atlanta, a place where I would assume the first macro force is there's a new Amazon office. There's lots of employment opportunities. The real estate is still pretty cheap relative to disposable income. There's, trends that show that clearly it's going to make a good amount of rent and maybe the cost of labor isn't crazy expensive. There's all these variables, right, to improve net operating income, which is, of course, the operating income versus the operating expenses, right? So give us an example of that story. And then on top of all those trends, you are literally building from zero. You found the land, we got to build the building. We're getting some mortgage lending, but for our down payment, it needs to come from investors. Is that the general, how it starts?
So great question. There's actually different options. So you can do A-class build up development, which is when, yes, a lot of the capital will come from investors. A lot of times retail investors, which I would call you and me, there's also going to be a big player involved who, is a trust fund or something that is actually putting in a lot of the capital. So institutional money, let's just call it that. There's also B-class assets. So I'll give you an example from earlier this year. There was a deal in Atlanta that my team took down. In this deal, it was owned by mom and pop. pop, and that's, people who've owned a property for a long time. They may not be optimizing that property, so they're making good rent, but they haven't put in, for example, tech packages that would measure the heating and cooling to like optimize the expenses. They may not be putting in additional fees like pet fees, parking fees. So there's a lot of like systematic business things you can do on an apartment building. Same thing when you're like a real estate agent or mortgage broker. There's ones who are just like calling around, like doing whatever, going for coffee. Then there's ones who have like a CRM and are like, I'm intentional, I'm cold calling, I'm doing all this, I'm building an actual business. So this example in Atlanta, it was, a mom and pop owner. It was also a private deal. So we actually went like direct to seller. So, cutting out the middleman at some level. Additionally, it was an assumed loan. So what that means is instead of going and getting new financing, you're actually able to take over the loan from the seller. The big thing in the States, and one of the other things about like the States versus Canada is like in the US, like some of these loan terms are like 30 years, right? So it's like a fixed rate for a longer time. And that's one of the big benefits too. And also in different states, and you totally get this in Vancouver, is there's states in the US that are a lot more landlord friendly versus in Toronto it's very tenant friendly, so it's really challenging to increase rents or to kick a bad tenant out. So we're also looking for assets that are in like landlord friendly states. So it's finding a property that has a lot of room to add value. So a B class asset's what's it called, where you can repair all the kitchens and do all this stuff, and then you look at the comparables and you see, okay, this is how much more we can boost rents, which then gives more money back to investors essentially. So that's kind of what this Atlanta deal looked like, and that was the opportunity where investors can come in, everything's done for you, and you just essentially profit on everybody else's work.
Love it. Well, very informative. Sarah, I really appreciate the granularity and what we got done in a very short amount of time for our, distracted audience members like myself that have a million things going on and kids in the background and dogs want to go for a walk and alerts on their phones and 10 other business opportunities. Any last thoughts you want to leave our audience with in terms of kind of a quick summary on the opportunity to invest in syndicates and how they can get in touch with you and your next opportunities?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm very active on LinkedIn. I'm sure Paul can put it in there. It's Sarah Mishkelly, as well at Highly Capital, HYLEE capital.com. That's my website. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm very passionate about education first, especially when we're getting into a new space. People want to feel like they understand something before investing, which I really respect. This is your hard-earned money. I would say moving into 2024, it's been a rough couple of years with multifamily. Let's be honest, we've all seen shifts in the real estate market, but we've just gotten notified and look, I don't have a crystal ball, but that feds are at least going to stall rates, if not bring them down in 2024 in the US. Once again, let's wait and see. So, there's a lot of distressed assets that have been coming online or in continuing to come online moving into next year. And what that looks like is there's going to be a lot of deals that investors can get into. So definitely, if you're looking to get into the syndication space, feel free to reach out and I can share more and see if it's a good fit. Because to be honest, it's not for everybody. If you like a lot of control, it's not for you. But if you want to profit passively and you like the security of real estate, then it could be a great option.
It really depends how you value your time, your risk tolerance, and your opportunity costs. It's all about that. But please don't just sit on your hands in fear. You can go on offense as long as you're educated and do some due diligence and want to put in a bit of work, and that depends on what you want to do. Great summary, Sarah. Thanks for your time, and stay dry and hot in beautiful Costa Rica.
Yeah, thank you so much, Paul. I really appreciate it.
Of course, we'll have to have you on again in the near future. Thank you again. Muchas gracias.